with another episode of Conversations and Connections. We're the official podcast of the Family Crisis Center of East Texas. I'm Stuart Burson, the Prevention Coordinator for the agency. With me today is our Executive Director, Whitney Burran. So you know it's going to be a special show if Whitney is on board.
I'm really excited. It's always a pleasure, Stuart, to be invited back to the show.
Is that sincere?
It is from the bottom of my heart.
Okay. Awesome. That sounded really sincere. But in all seriousness, this is something great that I really wanted Whitney to come onto the podcast to talk about. And that is our second annual Passion for Purple luncheon. That'll be October the 1st at the Pitzer Garrison Convention Center here in Lufkin. And Whitney, this is just, and I guess this is going to be an annual thing that we do now. So tell me why the agency is doing this again. You know, we did it last year, so we're doing this again. Why the agency is conducting the second annual Passion for Purple luncheon? What's the purpose of even having this?
Okay, well, and like you said, this is our second annual, and last year it was just such a success. You know, we did it, and we're like, it was one of the things that with domestic violence being in October, we as an agency, thought, what can we do to, bring the community together? And really it's a call of action, Stuart. Mm-hmm. It is bringing the community together, dedicated to raise awareness about domestic violence and also critical funds for our agency.
This may seem maybe an odd question, but why is it important to raise awareness of the agency and it's our mission to work with survivors and victims of domestic violence and sexual assault?
Well, I mean, it just really provides an opportunity to educate the public about the prevalence of and the impact of domestic violence in our communities. One of the main things that we as an agency always like to do all year long, not just during the month of October, is debunk any misconceptions about domestic violence,
right.
And encourage open conversations. And just by shedding a light on the realities of domestic violence, we as a community can come together to be equipped, recognize the signs, and just offer support to individuals who need our services and our help.
Well, one of the things I always think of, and I'm always try to be mindful of pointing this out whenever I wherever I go to do presentations and kind of introduce myself and the Crisis Center, to raise awareness of the agency and its mission. So many people know us for the women's shelter and for the thrift store.
Sure.
And that's really it. And I think a lot of our community members probably don't know of all the other things that the Family Crisis Center is involved with and the things that we do.
Yes, I would agree with that. There are so many, different aspects of our agency, from our 24-hour crisis hotline all the way down to, like you were saying, the public education and just that well-roundedness, taking that approach to prevention.
Yeah.
So just always such a pleasure to educate and talk about our agency everywhere we go.
Yeah. So this year, we had a great speaker last year, of course, and this year is definitely no exception. Who do we have? Who's going to be our guest speaker, our keynote speaker this year?
So this year's speaker is going to be Lorena Gallo-Bobbitt. Yep.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. So depending on how old you are, that name may sound familiar, and or it may not. Why Lorena Gallo? Why have her? What is her significance of speaking at this event?
So, and as you were saying, this is some people may recognize the name, some may not, but back in 1993, this is a trial that gained global attention.
Yeah. And
so, just across the globe. And so we had a great response from the community when we announced bringing Lorena in. And so, it's after years of enduring verbal and physical sexual abuse, Lorena made a desperate choice that led her to this trial.
Yeah.
And this luncheon just presents a unique opportunity for the community to hear Lorena's story. And this is just, her story of domestic violence and sexual assault and escape. And so this is just really a unique opportunity to come in and listen to a survivor's story.
Right. Well, and some people may be kind of taken aback by who we're going to have speaking. Most people may know of the incident, which we're not going to even get into
Sure.
here. But a lot of people probably don't know what her backstory is. I know personally of a couple of people who, she did that because she caught her husband cheating on her.
Sure, yeah.
And I have had to correct people and said, no. Now, you and I talked about he may have.
Sure.
But that's not the reason why she did what she did. People don't know that she has this history of marital abuse from this man.
And I would agree. And I think that from the perspective of advocates who are fighting this movement, like our agency, it's clear to us as advocates for domestic violence that this was, the case. And that was a large part of what had gone on and the reaction in the incident.
Right.
But, the trial really back then just brought domestic violence to the mainstream and highlighted the desperate measures that victims sometimes resort to after years of, trauma and abuse. And so, like I said, this just kind of is her story. And I think that it was a real struggle back then and sometimes even today to get anyone to view this as, a domestic violence situation and the unfortunate reality that many face behind closed doors and alone. And
Right.
So I think that as a community and as an agency, we must use these conversations to spark and raise awareness, spark those conversations and raise awareness, and, just change those harmful narratives and create safe spaces for survivors to come forward so no one has to endure abuse alone and that there's support for them.
And I have wondered if what happened in the early 90s, her story, if it happened today, if it would have been looked upon differently. Back then, the comedians and the media just kind of had a field day with
Sure.
it and not even really listening to her history and her story. It was all about what happened, again, the incident, and that was it. And of course, back then, I think we've all talked about it internally as an agency. Back then, especially domestic violence, marital abuse wasn't really in the spotlight like it is now.
And it's interesting because even working at this agency, I've been with the agencies for 16 years, and so of course I was. Let's see, how old was I in 1990? I was 5, and so I think that even if you were not knowledgeable or were younger back in that time, a lot of people still know and
Sure.
have heard the story. And
Right.
so, and you're right, it has been, over 30 years since this has happened. And we've come such a long way in the movement of domestic violence,
Yeah.
but we still have such a long way to go. And, back then, there was not even, money legislative towards,
Right.
domestic violence in agencies like the Family Crisis Center. So, like I said, and like you said, it's a different day and time, but there are still things about domestic violence and this conversation and the taboo, around it. And so I just think that it's just a really interesting story.
So I'm curious to know, and I know a little bit about this, how in the world did we even come to think of having her come speak? How did we even know that this is what she does now? How did that come about?
Well, that's a really good question. And so let me kind of backtrack to in 2019, the Texas Council on Family Violence had a conference, and we had a couple of staff members visit that conference, and they came back and they had talked about, Lorena Gallo-Bobbitt being there and talking about her story, the story of survival and just advocating for victims of domestic violence. And I thought it was interesting back then, and when we were thinking about bringing in a speaker, our team had just kind of, tossed around a couple of names and ideas, but I had went home that following weekend, and I joke I was doing a mound of laundry on my bed, and so I had some time to turn on the TV and watch. And as fate would have it, the docuseries, on Amazon Prime, it's a 4-part docuseries called Lorena, just kind of came across the TV. And I turned it on and I watched it. I just binged watched all 4 docuseries, and after I finished it, I came back and I was like, came back to the team, and we were like, we have to have this.
It was divine inspiration.
We have to have her. And so, us as an agency and a team, and you came in, we kind of designated lunch for our staff to kind of watch it, and we were just all very moved by the docuseries. And so that was one of the main parts of bringing her in. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think it's important also to let people know that she's not doing this capitalizing on fame or what happened. This is her personal mission is to raise awareness of domestic violence. She wants to start her own shelter where she lives.
She has a nonprofit. She started a nonprofit, and that's what she does. She goes around and she comes and speaks to agencies like ours. Yes, she is trying to open a nonprofit and a shelter, and so this has just been her mission for all these years, is just to advocate and talk to survivors.
So the money raised, and we'll talk here in a little bit about ticket prices and how people can attend. But obviously, this is also a fundraiser for our agency.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about how the money is used that we raise from the public.
So, of course, we're nonprofit.
Yeah.
And so we are, funded by, state and federal funding, but those funds are so strict, and sometimes they're very, what would it be? Just unknowing. We never know what that funding is going to look like or where it's going to come from. And so these unrestricted funds that we generate from, fundraisers like this all go back to client services. And it just continues to allow our agency to provide those free, confidential, trauma-informed, victim-centered services for our survivors that we serve. A lot of our clients come to our agency with just the clothes on their backs, and so they're starting their lives completely over. And so these funds go directly to helping them, move forward with their life free from trauma and abuse.
Right. Okay. So how much are tickets? Like, if someone's listening to this, they're interested in attending, what do they need to do to secure tickets for this event?
So individual tickets are $50. And of course, we have a numerous sponsorships that are available. And if you are interested in, being a sponsor or getting a table, you can contact Melissa Wheeler at mwheeler@fccet.com. Of course, you can go to our website. We have our presenting sponsor, which I'm very excited to announce. We have, so it's the Purple Passion. It's going to be presented in memory of Virginia Winston. So we are very grateful to the Winston family for supporting our agency all these years, but especially for the Passion for Purple Luncheon. And then we have our speaker sponsors, which are Commercial Bank and Vera Bank. And so just thank you so much for our sponsors. We still have sponsorships available.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, we still have sponsorships available. But, so if you are interested in supporting our agency or being a sponsor, you can reach out to our agency. Melissa Wheeler is who you're going to need to contact for all that information. So,
I want to go off script just a little bit and ask you this, and if you can't answer this,
go off script with me, Stuart.
I don't have my bleep
Let's
button here. What would you say to someone who, I can't believe you're having this woman come speak, after what she did, y'all are just looking for attention. What would you say to someone who may have something to say like that?
So, just kind of to reiterate what we have kind of just in recap, what we've just kind of talked about, I think that back then everyone found out one side of the story, and the media really portrayed, you only got to see the story that the media portrayed, right? And so I think that, back then everyone wanted to know why she did it or if she should pay for her crime. Millions of people across the country and the globe followed this court hearing. And I think that domestic violence activists really tried to refocus the conversation and really tried to focus on, the concept of domestic violence. And I think that if you were on the fence about attending this, luncheon or wondering why, to come and listen to it with an open mind and an open heart and, think about domestic violence and the struggles and the challenges that, survivors have. And so that's just, the intent of our agency is just to bring the community together and encourage these conversations. I welcome those conversations because it's always an opportunity to get different perspectives and have those conversations. And so just, come to our luncheon and just really listen and hear what she has to say.
Well, I was sharing with you the other day, I was at a coalition meeting where all of us Angelina County agencies are at. We go around what's happening at our agency. So I told everybody we're having this luncheon, and Lorena Gallo Bobbitt was going to be our speaker, and there was this collective gasp. In this big room.
Yeah.
And of course, like I said, it depends. And I was talking to someone yesterday at Angelina College. Hey, we're doing this luncheon and Lorena Bobbitt's going to be our speaker. Because he was of that age, he had no idea who I was even talking about.
And we have had and I can't say this enough and reiterate this enough, we have had such a great response from our community. We have such a wonderful community, supportive community, and a lot of people are so excited about this luncheon, and we, and our sponsors and our tables, and I think, as a whole, our community is very open-minded and support this movement, and just want to reiterate how grateful we are for the support of our, community.
Yeah. All right. Whitney, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Well, it's always a pleasure.
And I still think we need to come up with a topic for a little side hustle.
We can.
Me and you on a podcast. We have our own.
Listen, it would be a hit.
Music. Sometimes Whitney and I will talk about music. We kind of clue each other in on what we're listening to, and hey, you should listen to this. So
we're very interesting people. I'm just putting that out there.
Okay,
we're pretty cool people.
Anybody listening? Hey, here we're offering up our insight.
We're awesome.
All right, Whitney, thank you so much. Whitney Burran, our Executive Director here at the Family Crisis Center. If you have any questions or if you want some more information on the Passion for Purple Luncheon, I'll go ahead and give you our toll-free number. That's 1-800-828-7233. Also, be sure to subscribe to Conversations and Connections. You can do that via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much any podcast service of your choice. Also, if you'd like to make a donation, go to our website at FamilyCrisisCenterofEastTexas.com. There at the bottom left, you'll see a donate button. Click on that if you'd like to make a monetary donation to help survivors of relationship violence. Always be the voice, if not for you, for someone else.